Zephyr Gant had long become acquainted with the taste of despair, particularly when mixed with the rust-flavored air of Solumbria. The lunar city was a marvel, they said, with its skyline of steel and artificial light, but Zephyr saw it more as the universe's ironic joke on the human race, a bitter reminder of everything they'd left behind. If the humans had known they'd be spending eternity on a rock that looked like the armpit of space, they might have put more effort into getting along on Earth. The thing about Solumbria was its dependency on black hole technology. It was a bit like dating a psychopath, thrilling if you ignored the constant danger. The city thrived on the energy siphoned from a nearby black hole, maintained by the machine worship cult, eccentrics with a religious fervor for gears and algorithms instead of gods and angels. Zephyr sighed, kicking at a loose bolt that skittered across the gritty floor of the observatory. This particular observatory, perched at the highest point of Solumbria, was a cluttered mess of scopes, screens, and wires that looked like they'd been yanked out of a drunken cyborg's nightmare. Perfect place for an engineer who lived for anomalies. "Hey, Zephyr, you find anything interesting?" came a voice as dry as the lunar dust. It belonged to Voss, a fellow engineer with the social skills of a vacuum cleaner and the charm of a dead battery. "Depends on your definition of interesting," Zephyr replied, eyes glued to a screen showing star maps. "If you think Earth's vanishing is interesting, then yeah, I've hit the jackpot." Voss snorted, shuffling over with a mug of something that resembled coffee if you squinted and had no taste buds. "Earth. That's the old blue marble, right? What's it doing these days?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing," Zephyr said, pointing at the anomaly on the screen. "As in not there, gone, poof." Voss took a sip, grimacing like he'd swallowed optimism by mistake. "Well, people have been wanting a vacation from that place since the dawn of time. Maybe it finally took the hint." Zephyr leaned back in his chair, which creaked in protest. "Funny. But this is serious. Star maps don't just lose planets, and if they do, it's not usually Earth. Have you asked the machine worship cult? They probably have a divine algorithm or some mechanical prophecy that explains it," Voss suggested. Zephyr scoffed. "Those nuts think everything's a sign. I asked about a broken coffee machine once and got a sermon about the inevitable decay of all things, heralding the coming of the great gear." "Sounds deep," Voss said with a smirk. "Or maybe just caffeine-deprived." "So what do you think?" Zephyr asked, gesturing at the void where Earth should be. "Just a glitch or something we should worry about?" Voss rubbed his chin where stubble battled for supremacy over a week of neglect. "Could be both. In my experience, glitches usually mean someone's about to have a really bad day." Zephyr considered this, then decided it was time to pay a visit to the cultists. If anyone had answers, or at least a colorful story, it would be them. He grabbed his jacket, more out of habit than necessity, since weather wasn't exactly a concern on the moon. The machine worship cult's temple was where you'd expect it to be, dead center in the middle of Solumbria, as if it were the heart of this metallic carcass. Zephyr made his way through the city, past bustling markets selling recycled necessities and hover carts sputtering like asthmatic fish. The temple itself was a gleaming monstrosity, all chrome and circuits, a giant middle finger to aesthetics. Inside, the air hummed with the sound of chanting, if you could call it that. It was more like a robotic drone, punctuated by the occasional clang of metal on metal. Zephyr had never felt comfortable here, surrounded by zealots who thought a mainframe was the second coming. "Ah, Brother Zephyr," intoned Galvani, the cult's high priest, who had the unsettling habit of looking through people, rather than at them. His robes were a kaleidoscope of flashing LED and wires, making him look like a failed experiment from an 80s science fair. "Galvani," Zephyr nodded, forcing a smile that felt as out of place as a sun lamp in a cave. "Got a minute?" "For the seeker of glitches, always," Galvani replied, his voice as smooth as a well-oiled gear. "Earth's missing," Zephyr stated bluntly, deciding that sugarcoating was for people with more patience than sense. Galvani raised an eyebrow, or at least what passed for one beneath the tangle of circuitry adorning his head. Interesting. Have you considered that Earth may have simply transcended its physical form? Zephyr sighed. I was hoping for answers, not a lecture on metaphysical relocation. Galvani chuckled, a sound like static on an open channel. Nothing disappears without leaving some trace behind. Even the divine hologram leaves a shadow. Great, so where's the shadow? Zephyr pressed. Galvani gestured to a grand console covered in switches and buttons, the cult's sacred oracle. The oracle might illuminate your path. Zephyr approached the console, eyeing it warily. He'd heard stories of people losing iors in its blinking depths, emerging only to spout nonsense about cosmic balance and the will of the central processor. As he scanned the data, something caught his eye, a stream of information that made even less sense than usual. There's something here, he muttered, more to himself than to Galvani. The priest leaned in, his expression one of almost childlike curiosity. What does it say? It says we're screwed, Zephyr replied, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Or at least, it strongly implies it with a lot of zeros and ones. Galvani pursed his lips, as though considering the philosophical implications of being screwed. The universe's complexity often appears as chaos to those who do not worship it. Or it's just chaos because it's chaos, Zephyr shot back, feeling his patience wear thinner than the atmosphere outside. Galvani straightened, his demeanor shifting to something more formal. Do not underestimate the power of belief, brother Zephyr. This city, we all depend on it. Zephyr nodded. Yeah, I get it. But belief won't fix this if everything goes to hell. Galvani's eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. Perhaps if we look into the ancient codes. Right, Zephyr muttered, already backing away. You do that. I'll check with the sane part of the population. Leaving the temple behind, Zephyr found himself back in the cold embrace of Silumbria's streets. He couldn't shake the feeling that Earth's disappearance was more than just a cosmic glitch or a mechanical oversight. It was a premonition, a warning. As if on cue, the distant hum of the black hole's energy siphon echoed through the city, a reminder of just how precariously humanity was perched on this celestial afterthought of a home. Home, Zephyr muttered to himself, tasting the word like a sigh or memory. Who needs it anyway? He continued down the street, the weight of the anomaly pressing against his mind like a relentless tide. The universe, it seemed, had a particularly twisted sense of humor, and Zephyr Gant was right in the punchline. Back at the observatory, Voss was still nursing his mug of questionable liquid. So, how'd it go? Did our mechanical messiahs have any wisdom to impart? Zephyr shrugged, slumping into his chair. They're about as useful as a solar panel at night. Voss chuckled, leaning back as if he'd reach enlightenment through lumbar support. Well, guess it's up to us regular folks to save the day. Again. Zephyr flipped the star maps on the screen, searching for anything that might help them avert disaster. Yeah, because that's worked out so well in the past. Voss sighed, raising his mug in a mock toast. To the end of the world, then. May it be swift and filled with less paperwork. Zephyr clinked his invisible glass, the faintest of smiles tugging at his lips. I'll drink to that. As they stared at the stars, some of them missing, others flickering ominously, they both knew the universe didn't care about belief or bravado. It was indifferent, vast, and full of mysteries that could swallow a planet whole without even blinking. And whether they liked it or not, Zephyr and Voss were about to unravel one of those mysteries, without getting themselves erased in the process if they were lucky. Which, considering their track record, was a pretty big if. Zephyr stared at the star map with the kind of intensity usually reserved for contemplating existential crises, or whether to risk eating a week-old sandwich. The void where Earth should be was a gaping maw, ready to swallow anyone foolish enough to look for meaning in the universe's indifference. And right now, it was laughing at him, its uncharted territory stretching out like a cosmic middle finger. Still trying to find a reason for the universe's latest party trick? Voss asked, not looking up from whatever contraption he was disassembling for the 5th time this week. Zephyr rubbed his eyes. Just trying to figure out if this is a glitch or a sign we're all about to become space dust. Thought I'd ask our friendly neighborhood cult for insights, but all I got were techno-babble and a headache. Sounds like a regular Tuesday, Voss remarked, replacing a component that looked suspiciously like it had been glued together using hope and a prayer. Maybe they are involved. Wouldn't surprise me if those gearheads decided to mess with the cosmic settings. Zephyr frowned, the idea lodging itself like a rusty nail in his brain. You think Archon Voss is behind this? Well, first, let's not confuse me with him. I clean up after my messes, Voss said, tapping his grease-stained shirt. But yeah, if there's one thing cults love more than obscure prophecies, it's screwing with stuff they shouldn't. Makes sense, Zephyr admitted, adjusting the star map to highlight recent anomalies. The guy always did have that "I know something you don't" smirk. Voss nodded sagely. Probably because he does, and it's usually something like, "I can turn your life into a bad sci-fi flick." Zephyr sighed, pushing away from the console. All right, time to dig deeper before the cult decides to crown themselves rulers of the universe. Fancy a walk? Not particularly, Voss replied, setting his tools aside. But I do fancy knowing what's going on before my morning coffee demands I explain the afterlife to it. The streets of Solumbria were as chaotic as ever, a messy symphony of haggling merchants, sputtering hover carts, and pedestrians who somehow managed to look both lost and determined. The Lunar City was a place that thrived on contradictions, barely functioning yet always bustling. Ever wonder if this place is a metaphor for life? Zephyr asked, narrowly dodging a vendor selling what appeared to be fried something. Broken but still going. Voss shrugged, sidestepping a stray robotic pet squeaking for attention. Only when I'm drunk. Otherwise, I try not to think too hard. Bad for the blood pressure. They reached the cult's temple, its chrome facade gleaming like a beacon of misplaced priorities. Zephyr couldn't help but marvel at the irony of a structure so overly polished in a city that had given up on aesthetics ages ago. Back so soon, Brother Zephyr, Galvani greeted them as they stepped inside, his synthetic robe sparking in the dim light like a malfunctioning disco ball. And you've brought a friend. Voss gave a half-hearted wave. We're here to check on the universe's well-being. Heard you might have been fiddling with the cosmic knobs. Ah, the great mysteries of existence, Galvani intoned, with the kind of reverence most people reserved for fine wine or their grandmother's secret recipes. We merely seek to understand our place in the grand design. Right, Zephyr said, unwilling to get sidetracked by philosophical mumbo-jumbo. We're more concerned about Earth vanishing from the star maps. You know anything about that? Galvani's expression shifted to that of a politician caught in a lie. The disappearance of Earth is a sign, a message from the machines that guide us. You mean the ones you built? Voss asked, crossing his arms. Seems a bit narcissistic to think they're sending messages just to you. Galvani chuckled, a sound like static over a broken comm line. It's not about us. It's about the balance of the cosmos. The machine worship cult seeks to maintain this balance. Yeah, well, balance or not, we're all going to be pretty unbalanced if this keeps up, Zephyr pointed out. You've got any actual information, or are we just here for another sermon? Galvani hesitated, glancing around as if conspiratorial shadows were listening. There is something. A project we've been working on. The Great Gear Initiative. Voss snorted. Of course, and what's that supposed to do? Make the universe spin smoother? Galvani ignored the jibe, focusing on Zephyr with unnerving intensity. The initiative is meant to stabilize the energy siphon to ensure Solumbria's survival, but sometimes in seeking balance one must tip the scales. Zephyr felt a twinge of dread. What did you do, Galvani? Nothing permanent, the priest said quickly. Merely a test, a minor adjustment to the black hole's parameters to see its effects on spatial harmony. Minor? Voss echoed incredulously. You fiddled with a black hole like it was a damn radio dial. Galvani spread his hands in a placating gesture. The universe is resilient. It can handle small fluctuations. Yeah, tell that to Earth, Zephyr shot back. You've messed with forces that could wipe us all out. The priest's face hardened. We are not reckless, Brother Zephyr. The initiative is delicate. We need time to fully develop it. Time we might not have, Zephyr said, his voice sharp as a jagged shard of metal. If Earth's already gone, what's next? Solumbria. Us? Galvana's eyes narrowed, his demeanor shifting again, this time to something bordering on defensive. You don't understand. The machines require faith, and faith requires trust. Without it, we are nothing. Yeah, well, faith doesn't exactly power the lights, Voss replied. More like science and energy. Zephyr stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you're so confident, prove it. Show us the initiative. Let us help before your next adjustment sends us spinning into the void. The hesitation in Galvana's eyes was palpable, but eventually he nodded. Very well, but understand, Brother Zephyr, that what you will see is beyond your current comprehension. I'm a fast learner, Zephyr replied, the words laced with a mix of sarcasm and determination. Galvani led them through a series of winding corridors, each more labyrinthine than the last. The air was thick with the hum of machines, their rhythms blending into a dissonant orchestra of technology. Eventually, they arrived at a chamber that seemed to pulse with a life of its own, every surface thrumming with energy. This is the heart of the initiative, Galvani announced, gesturing to a massive console that dominated the room. It looked like someone had taken a puzzle, thrown it into a blender, and decided it was functional. Zephyr stepped forward, feeling the vibrations beneath his feet. And this is all connected to the black hole. Yes, Galvani confirmed. From here we can manipulate the energy siphon, adjust the parameters, and play God, Voss interjected, eyeing the setup with a mix of awe and suspicion. Guide the divine machinery, Galvani corrected, a hint of pride in his voice. To ensure our continued existence. Zephyr studied the console, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like an iron cloak. And what happens if you screw up? Galvani's smile was enigmatic, bordering on unsettling. Then we adapt. As we always have. Not exactly comforting, Voss muttered, scanning the room for any signs of spontaneous combustion or impending doom. Zephyr turned to Galvani. All right, show us what this thing can do. And start with how you made Earth disappear. The priest hesitated, then began inputting a series of commands into the console, his fingers dancing over the keys with practiced precision. The screens flickered to life, displaying data streams that seemed to flow like rivers of light. This is what we adjusted, Galvani explained, pointing to a fluctuating waveform that looked suspiciously unstable. A minor recalibration of the gravitational constants to optimize the siphon. And you didn't think that might have side effects? Zephyr asked, eyeing the display with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. Every experiment has its risks, Galvani replied, his tone defensive. But without risk there can be no progress, or destruction, Voss added, arms crossed. One or the other. Zephyr watched the data scroll by, feeling the weight of each calculation, each adjustment as though they were tangible things pressing down on him. And Earth. What exactly happened there? Galvana's expression shifted, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. The calibration exceeded initial projections. It triggered a spatial cascade, temporarily disrupting the planet's spatial signature. Temporarily? Zephyr echoed. Because it looks pretty damn permanent from where I'm standing. We are working to rectify it, Galvani assured them. The process takes time. Time we may not have, Zephyr repeated, his frustration mounting. You've put everything at risk with this little experiment of yours. Galvani's gaze was steady, unflinching. The universe is resilient, Brother Zephyr. It can handle more than you give it credit for. Or it'll handle us, Voss said darkly. And I don't fancy being the universe's next chew toy. Zephyr studied the readouts, the enormity of the task ahead settling over him like a cold fog. The initiative was a Pandora's box, one they'd opened without understanding the consequences. And now it was up to him, Voss, and maybe a few others with more brains than bravado, to close it before it swallowed them all. So what's the plan? Voss asked, breaking the silence that had settled over them like a shroud. Zephyr took a deep breath, his mind racing with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. But improbability had never stopped him before, and it wouldn't now. "The plan," he said, meeting Voss's gaze, "is to fix this before we're all just another anomaly on someone else's star map." Galvani inclined his head, a gesture of reluctant respect. "Then may the machines guide your path, Brother Zephyr." "Hope they do a better job than they have so far," Zephyr replied, turning back to the console, determination burning in his chest like a star. He knew the odds were against them, that the universe didn't care whether they succeeded or failed. But then again, Zephyr had always been one to bet against the odds. Zephyr Gant sat in his dingy workshop, contemplating the universe's cruel indifference as he adjusted the star map. Irony was his constant companion these days, a fact emphasized by the blinking light that suggested Earth was still missing, like a sock in a bad spin cycle. His comlink buzzed with a notification. Lyra Tamsin's voice crackled through, dripping with her usual caustic charm. "Zephyr, you busy contemplating your navel, or can you spare a moment for some old-fashioned espionage?" Zephyr grinned despite himself. "You know me, Lyra. Always got time for a bit of Saturday night subterfuge." "Good," she replied, her voice a mix of annoyance and amusement. "Because we're about to break into the cult's archives, and I'd rather not do it solo. Even a cynic like you needs a wingman." "You sure about this, Lyra?" Zephyr asked, though he already knew the answer. Lyra was as unstoppable as a runaway asteroid when she set her mind to something. "Positive. That data might just tell us why our blue marble decided to play hide and seek with the cosmos." "All right, meet me at the usual spot," Zephyr said, grabbing a jacket that may have once been the color of optimism before Selumbria's grime got its claws into it. The usual spot was an alley that smelled vaguely of burnt circuits and desperation. Zephyr found Lyra there, her hair a wild tangle that suggested she'd recently been electrocuted or had a particularly aggressive daydream. "Nice of you to dress up for the occasion," Zephyr quipped, nodding at her scuffed boots and patchwork coat. Lyra snorted. "Like I'm here to impress the cult's fashion police." "Let's crack this nut before they decide to tighten their security." The pair made their way through the shadowy corridors of Selumbria, the city's somber hum a familiar soundtrack. They slipped past a guard who was more interested in his handheld game than his actual job. Zephyr felt a pang of sympathy. If he were stuck on shift, he'd be ignoring the universe too. The entrance to the archives loomed ahead, a pair of metal doors that seemed to whisper no entry but in a decidedly unwelcoming tone. A keypad blinked at them, begging for a code it thought only the worthy possessed. "Think they've upgraded since our last visit?" Lyra asked, eyeing the keypad like it owed her money. "Only one way to find out," Zephyr replied, pulling a small device from his pocket. He connected it to the keypad, bypassing its electronic brain with a couple of well-placed commands. "Old habits die hard," Lyra said, watching the door unlock with a soft click. "Old habits are how we survive," Zephyr countered, pushing the door open to reveal the cult's inner sanctum of secrets. He hadn't been here since. Well, actually, he'd never been here. Zephyr preferred to keep it that way, but desperate times and all that. Rows of data servers stretched out like somber monoliths, each humming with secrets and the occasional existential crisis. They moved quickly, aware that their welcome was as thin as a politician's promise. "Okay, let's find out what's behind door number 1, Lyra said, tapping into a terminal. Her fingers flew over the keys with the confidence of someone who'd spent too much time breaking digital locks. Zephyr scanned the room, keeping an eye out for unwanted company. "You got anything?" he asked, trying to sound casual despite the knot of tension tying itself in his stomach. "Depends on your definition of anything," Lyra replied, frowning at the screen. "There's a lot of encrypted files here labeled Project Great Gear. Sounds like exactly the kind of overly grandiose nonsense we're looking for." "Can you crack it?" Zephyr asked. "Can a black hole suck?" she retorted, plugging in a decryption module. "Give me a minute." A minute stretched into several, each second marked by the soft whir of cooling fans and the distant echo of footsteps that might have been paranoia or something more concrete. Finally, Lyra leaned back, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Got it," she said, and the screen blossomed with lines of text and schematics, a digital tapestry of potential doom. Zephyr peered over her shoulder, squinting at the data. "Looks like a plan to manipulate the black hole's output, something about temporal displacement fields and cosmic recalibration." Lyra snorted. "Fancy words for we messed up big time. These idiots really thought they could play puppet master with the universe." "Well, they did make Earth disappear," Zephyr pointed out, scanning the information. "And it seems deliberate. There's references here to phase shifting and— Wait, is this a schedule?" Lyra's eyes widened. "A schedule? As in now you see it, now you don't," Zephyr nodded. "Looks like they've been testing this for a while. Earth's just the latest guinea pig." "Charming," Lyra muttered. "So what's the plan? How do we stop them from turning us into cosmic dust bunnies?" Zephyr thought for a moment, weighing options that felt like lead in his mind. "First, we need a copy of this data. Then we find someone who can actually make sense of it without blowing us up." Lyra nodded, already transferring the files to a secure drive. "I know just the person, but he's not going to be happy about it." "When are they ever?" Zephyr asked, keeping an ear out for any signs of approach. "Let's just hope your friend isn't the type to shoot the messenger. More like make the messenger buy drinks," Lyra said, ejecting the drive with a flourish. "All right, let's get out of here before Galvana's lackeys realize we're rearranging their sacred puzzle." They retraced their steps, moving with the kind of urgency usually reserved for people who'd just set off a fire alarm. The guard was still engrossed in his game, allowing them to slip past without so much as a sideways glance. Once they were back in the city's winding alleys, Zephyr allowed himself a breath of relief, though it tasted faintly of exhaust fumes and anxiety. "That was almost too easy," Zephyr said, glancing over his shoulder. "Don't jinx it," Lyra replied, pocketing the drive. "Remember, the universe loves an optimist almost as much as it loves making their lives miserable." As they made their way to Lyra's contact, Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that they'd merely skimmed the surface of a much deeper problem. The universe had a funny way of complicating things, like a cat knocking over a precariously stacked set of dominoes just to watch them fall. "Who's this contact of yours?" Zephyr asked, hoping Lyra had more than just a name scribbled on the back of a napkin. "Name's Helix," she replied. "He's a bit of a recluse, but when it comes to translating cultish gibberish into something actionable, he's our best shot. Just don't mention anything about the last time we met." Zephyr raised an eyebrow. "Why? What happened last time?" "Let's just say we had a disagreement over the definition of boro," Lyra said with a shrug. Zephyr chuckled. "Remind me to never lend you anything valuable." "Smart man," Lyra said, leading the way down a side street that seemed to have been forgotten by urban planners and cleaning crews alike. Helix's place turned out to be a nondescript door sandwiched between two buildings that had seen better centuries. Lyra knocked, using a pattern that Zephyr hoped wasn't the universal sign for "we come in peace." The door opened a crack, revealing a pair of eyes that looked like they hadn't seen daylight in a while, probably by choice. "What do you want?" Helix asked, his voice a mix of suspicion and faint curiosity. Lyra held up the drive. "Need some help deciphering a particularly naughty bit of data. Thought of you." Helix's gaze flicked to Zephyr, assessing him with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for people trying to sell you enchanted beans. "And him? Extra set of eyes," Lyra said. "Plus, he's got a knack for breaking things down to basics." Helix considered this, then nodded. "Fine, come in, but don't touch anything. Last time you were here, I'm pretty sure I lost a wrench." Lyra rolled her eyes as they stepped inside. "I told you I never saw your precious wrench." Zephyr took in the chaos of Helix's abode, bits of dismantled machinery, piles of data chips, and a disturbing number of empty food containers. He wondered if Helix ever left the place, or if he just burrowed deeper into his techno-cocoon. "All right, let's see what you've got," Helix said, clearing a space on a cluttered table. Lyra handed him the drive, and he inserted it into a terminal that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and wishful thinking. As Helix worked, Zepha's mind churned with possibilities. The implications of the data were staggering. They were standing at the edge of a chasm filled with unknowns, and it was going to take every bit of ingenuity and resourcefulness to step back from it. "Okay, this is complicated," Helix said, frowning at the screen. "They're manipulating time-space fields trying to achieve some kind of controlled displacement." "Controlled?" Lyra asked with a snort. "Earth vanished. That doesn't scream controlled to me." Helix shrugged, eyes glued to the screen. "It's a delicate process. They're trying to tweak the universe's settings without crashing the whole system. If they're fiddling with time-space, couldn't that, I don't know, cause a lot more problems?" Zepha asked. "Like I said, complicated," Helix replied, rubbing his temples. "If their calculations are off, it could destabilize the entire siphon, maybe even the black hole itself." "Perfect," Zepha muttered. "So we're sitting on a cosmic powder keg and someone's already lit the fuse." Lyra folded her arms, her expression grim. "Can you find a way to undo it, make Earth pop back into existence?" Helix leaned back, considering. "Possibly, but it'll take time, and access to their systems, because the only way to reverse this is from the inside." Zepha glanced at Lyra. "Looks like we've got another break-in in our future. And I thought today was going to be dull." "Guess we'd better get started," Lyra said, determination hardening her voice. "Because if we don't fix this, we might as well start learning how to exist in whatever pocket of nothing they've shoved Earth into." Helix nodded, a rare flicker of something like hope in his eyes. "Let's get to work then. The universe waits for no one." Zepha couldn't help but smile at that. "And here I thought we were supposed to be the masters of our own fate." "Yeah," Lyra replied, a sardonic grin tugging at her lips. "But who said the universe had to play by our rules?" Zepha had a love-hate relationship with the concept of urgency. It kept him on his toes, which was great for his reflexes if not his nerves. But the constant pressure was a bit like being massaged by a meat tenderizer, not exactly relaxing. He and Lyra made their way through the shadowy labyrinth of Selumbria's backstreets, the city's distant hum vibrating in their bones like the universe's most annoying ringtone. "Helix's place is always a joy," Zepha said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he sidestepped a particularly fragrant pile of refuse. "I'm sure we'll leave with at least one new exotic disease." "Think of it as character building," Lyra shot back, her grin as sharp as broken glass. "Besides, we've got bigger problems than the weird rash you're about to develop." She was right, of course. The data they'd snagged was the kind of smoking gun that'd turn into an inferno if they didn't act fast. Helix had already started digging into the tangled mess of code and schematics like a cybernetic archaeologist, but the cult wouldn't just stand by and let their secret plans unravel. "And speaking of bigger problems," Zepha continued, "I'd say the cult won't be sending us a fruit basket anytime soon." "More like a we know where you sleep card," Lyra replied, adjusting her comlink nervously. "They've got to know we're onto them." Zepha was about to respond when the ground beneath them shuddered. He reached out, grabbing Lyra's arm to steady himself as the tremor intensified, the ground beneath their feet vibrating like an out-of-tune drum. "This can't be good," he muttered, eyes scanning for whatever could cause such a disturbance. In Selumbria, tremors weren't a result of tectonic whimsy, but usually something far more deliberate and dangerous. "Let's hope it's just the city's archaic plumbing," Lyra said, though her expression wasn't exactly hopeful. They made it to a relatively stable alley before the shaking subsided. Zepha pulled out his comlink, tapping into the local networks for answers. The screen flickered with a series of emergency alerts and energy fluctuation reports. Selumbria's power grid was spiking like a heart monitor on a caffeine high, no prizes for guessing what could be causing it. "Looks like the cult's little experiment is having side effects," Zepha said, showing Lyra the screen. "Energy surges all over the place." Fantastic, she replied, groaning. As if black hole energy wasn't temperamental enough without those lunatics fiddling with it. The cult was clearly ramping up whatever cosmic mischief they'd set in motion. The question was, how much time did they have before everything went more sideways than a crab on a treadmill? We need to get back to Helix, Lyra said, urgency sharpening her tone. See if he's found anything that can help us shut this down. They set off again, picking up the pace, both of them hyper-aware of eyes that might be watching from shadows. The cult was notorious for its members' ability to blend in, like camouflaged roaches waiting to scuttle out when the lights went off. Helix's door was a welcome sight, albeit one that looked as if it might fall off its hinges at the slightest provocation. Lyra knocked with her special pattern, which Zephyr had to admit sounded suspiciously like the intro to a bad pop song. The door opened, Helix's face a mask of concentration, eyes glazed from too many hours spent peering at screens like a digital prophet. "Get in," he said, stepping aside to let them pass. "I've got something you need to see." Inside, Helix's abode was just as they'd left it, organized chaos that only made sense if you'd spent a lifetime navigating it. Zephyr followed Helix to the terminal, where a series of complicated graphs and lines danced like a frenetic symphony of data. "So, good news or bad news first?" Helix asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Good news," Zephyr said, though he hardly expected anything of the sort. "I've isolated the patterns they've been using. They're not just fiddling with the black hole's energy output, they are trying to create a stable wormhole." Zephyr's eyebrows shot up. "A wormhole, as in shortcuts through space-time. That's the idea," Helix confirmed. "But their calculations are about as reliable as a lunar politician's expense report." Lyra let out a low whistle. "And the bad news," Helix said, finally turning to face them, "is that if they succeed, they could cause a catastrophic collapse of the black hole's event horizon. We're talking a cosmic implosion that'd make a supernova look like a birthday candle." "Charming," Zephyr deadpanned. "So we've got to stop them from finishing this, or we're all toast." "Toast," Lyra repeated, with extra existential dread spread on top. Helix nodded, his hands dancing over the keyboard. "I've managed to decrypt some of their project logs, and it seems like they're gearing up for a final test run within the next couple of days." Zephyr felt his stomach knot. "Any idea where they are operating from?" "Somewhere in the industrial district," Helix replied. "I've triangulated the power spikes and traced them back to a few potential locations, but it's going to take some legwork to narrow it down." "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us," Lyra said, determination hardening her features. "Can you keep digging?" "We'll check out those locations and see what we can find." Helix nodded, already lost in the whirlwind of data and code. "Just be careful. Their security's going to be tighter than a miser's purse strings, especially with all the anomalies going on." As they left Helix's place, the gravity of the situation sank in further. The fate of Solumbria, maybe even the galaxy, hung precariously on their ability to outwit a group of lunatics with a god complex. "This is starting to feel like one of those impossible missions," Zephyr said, as they made their way towards the industrial district. "Wouldn't be the first time," Lyra replied, her grin a flash of teeth in the dim light. "Think of it as another opportunity to beat the odds." The industrial district was a maze of dilapidated factories and forgotten warehouses, the perfect playground for clandestine activities. Zephyr and Lyra moved cautiously, each step deliberate as they approached the first of Helix's potential locations. "Looks quiet," Lyra observed, eyeing the building with suspicion. "Too quiet," Zephyr agreed, the cliché slipping out despite himself. "Let's see if anyone's home." They approached a side entrance, finding it locked but not alarmed. A few moments with Lyra's lockpicking tool, a device that looked suspiciously like a regular screwdriver, got them inside. The building was dark and silent, save for the faint hum of machinery somewhere in the depths. It was the kind of place that seemed to defy your sound, absorbing it into the shadows. Spooky, Zephyr muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Perfect place to plot the end of the universe. They moved deeper into the complex, senses on high alert for any sign of security. The further they went, the more Zephyr felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing in on them. Finally, they reached a large, open space filled with consoles and equipment, the kind of setup that screamed evil lair without a hint of irony. "Looks like we've hit the jackpot," Lyra said, eyeing the array of technology with a mix of awe and trepidation. "Let's hope it's not a jackpot full of explosives," Zephyr replied, scanning the room for anything of interest. They split up, each of them sifting through the mess of wires and screens, looking for anything that might help them piece together the cult's plans. "This console here," Lyra said, pointing to a terminal displaying a series of numbers and symbols. "Looks like they are running simulations." Zephyr nodded, joining her. "Can you pull up the logs?" "See what they've been testing." "Working on it," she replied, fingers flying over the keys with practiced ease. After a few moments, the screen erupted with lines of data, a chaotic torrent that soon resolved into a series of logs. "Here we go," Zephyr said, leaning closer. "They've definitely been busy." Lyra scanned the logs, her expression growing grimmer with every entry. "They've been running test after test, each one inching closer to a breakthrough. And if they succeed?" Zephyr asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we're all in for a very bad day," Lyra said, her voice a hard edge in the darkness. "We've got to stop them, and fast." Zephyr was about to respond when the sound of footsteps echoed from one of the corridors. They exchanged a glance, tension crackling between them like static. "Guess we've overstayed our welcome," Zephyr said, heart pounding. "Time to go," Lyra agreed, already moving towards the exit. They retraced their steps, urgency pushing them faster as the footsteps grew louder. Zephyr's mind raced, trying to form a plan even as they fled through the shadows. "Back door," Lyra hissed, nodding towards an emergency exit. They burst through the door, the cold air a sudden shock after the musty confines of the factory. Zephyr's mind buzzed with adrenaline, the reality of their situation sinking in like a lead weight. "We've got to regroup," he said, breathless but resolute, "and figure out our next move." "Helix will have more info by now," Lyra said, leading the way. "Let's hope he's got some good news for a change." They disappeared into the alleys, leaving the factory and its secrets behind. The tremors in Solumbria were growing, but so was their determination. As they vanished into the maze of the city, the universe's indifferent gaze felt just a little less daunting. Zephyr and Lyra had barely caught their breath when the cult members descended on them like a swarm of overly enthusiastic wasps. Perhaps expecting a warm welcome was a tad optimistic, but optimism had never been Zephyr's strong suit anyway. The cultists, clad in robes that looked like something out of a budget horror flick, advanced with the kind of determination usually reserved for people trying to get a refund from a bureaucratic black hole. "Well, this is just peachy," Zephyr drawled as he raised his hands in a gesture of surrender that was about as genuine as a politician's promise. Lyra followed suit, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. "You guys don't mess around, do you?" A cultist stepped forward, holding what appeared to be a ceremonial staff, though it was probably just a fancy stick with delusions of grandeur. "Silence," he hissed, in a voice that suggested he was aiming for menacing but landed somewhere around melodramatic. "Silence," Lyra repeated, deadpan. "That's original." "Do you also do birthday parties?" The cultist's face twitched, but he seemed to remember his training. Ignore the sarcasm, focus on the kidnapping. The cultists efficiently herded them through the labyrinth of corridors, deeper into the bowels of the factory. Zephyr couldn't help but feel this was all very cliché. Secret lair, check. Hooded cultists, check. Impending doom, triple check with a side of existential dread. Finally, they were ushered into a cavernous chamber that looked like it had aspirations of grandeur, but settled for looking ominous instead. At the center was Archon Voss, the cult's leader, who was busy fiddling with a console that looked like it had been cobbled together by someone with a loose understanding of electronics and a love for duct tape. "Ah, our guests of honor," Voss announced, turning towards them with a smile that was about as warm as a dead fish. "Welcome, you're just in time for the grand finale." "Great," Zephyr replied. "I love a good show. Hope you've got popcorn." Voss chuckled, though it was the kind of chuckle that made your skin crawl. "You have no idea what's at stake here, do you? The universe is on the brink of transformation, and you two are just in time to witness history." "History, sure," Lyra shot back. "As in how we all became cosmic toast." The grin on Voss's face widened. "Oh, but it's so much more than that. Imagine a universe where Earth's energy fuels a new era of enlightenment." Zephyr felt his stomach knot. "Earth? I thought Earth was missing." "You know, poof, gone like a magician's assistant." "Missing," Voss repeated with a conspiratorial nod. "But not lost. You see, the energy from Earth is still out there, dormant, waiting, much like you two. It's time to put it to good use." "Somehow, I don't think you mean solar panels," Zephyr quipped, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Voss ignored the comment and gestured grandly at the console. "With the energy from Earth, we can open stable wormholes, realign the stars. We're talking power beyond comprehension." "And you think you can control that?" Lyra asked, incredulous. "Sounds like trying to juggle grenades while blindfolded." Voss's eyes gleamed with a fervor that was equal parts terrifying and pitiful. "Control is an illusion. We're merely the conductors in this cosmic symphony." Zephyr exchanged a glance with Lyra. "More like the clowns in a cosmic circus," he muttered. Voss didn't catch the remark, thankfully, because a new flurry of activity distracted him. Cultists busied themselves around the chamber, adjusting settings and checking equipment with the urgency of a chicken dinner caught in a tornado. "So this is the part where you try to kill us, right?" Zephyr asked, attempting nonchalance while his brain screamed at him to run. "Kill you?" Voss seemed genuinely amused, as if killing was a rather quaint suggestion. "No, no, you two are far too valuable. You will bear witness to the dawn of a new era." Zephyr opened his mouth to say something snarky, but the look Lyra shot him was enough to zip his lips. For now, with a flourish, Voss activated the console. Lights flared to life, illuminating a device in the room's center, a bizarre contraption with spinning rings and pulsating cores. It looked like the kind of thing you'd find in a mad scientist's attic, right next to the world-destroying for dummies manual. "Behold," Voss declared, "the gateway." "What the hell is that?" Lyra asked, voice flat. "The culmination of our work," Voss replied, reverence dripping from each word. "With this, we will harness Earth's residual energy, opening a pathway to infinite possibilities." Zephyr peered at the spinning rings. "Looks like a giant blender. I assume we're the fruit salad." Voss gave a derisive snort. "The fruits of our labors, perhaps. You have the honor of being the first to see it in action." "Joy," Lyra said, deadpan. "I always wanted to be a guinea pig." The cultists continued their preparations, their movements feverish as the device hummed with increasing intensity. The air vibrated, filled with the promise of untamed energy and the threat of cataclysm. "We should probably do something," Zephyr whispered to Lyra, trying not to let the rising panic creep into his voice. "Like what?" Lyra shot back. "Ask them nicely to stop." "I'm fresh out of witty one-liners." Just then, the door behind them burst open, causing every cultist in the room to freeze like deer caught in headlights. Helix barged in, looking like he just sprinted a marathon while dodging traffic in a war zone. "Am I late?" Helix asked, panting. Zephyr blinked. "Depends." "Did you bring anything useful, like a giant off switch?" Helix grinned, an expression that bordered on manic. "Even better." With that, he pulled out a small device, something that looked distinctly cobbled together from spare comlink parts and a healthy dose of desperation. Before anyone could react, he flung it toward the console. It landed with a metallic thud, cables unwinding like electronic tentacles. "What is that?" Voss demanded, suddenly not so smug. Helix's grin widened. "Let's call it an equalizer." For a split second, everything was silent. Then the device activated, sending a shockwave of static through the room. The console sparked, screens flickering like a strobe light at a bad rave. Chaos erupted. Cultists scrambled to contain the damage, Voss shouting orders that were lost in the din. Zephyr and Lyra found themselves momentarily forgotten, a rare stroke of luck they weren't about to waste. "Time to leave," Lyra said, grabbing Zephyr's arm. They bolted for the door, Helix hot on their heels, the echo of pandemonium chasing them through the corridors. "Nice timing," Zephyr said as they ran, his heart pounding louder than the alarm now blaring behind them. "You know me," Helix replied. "I always show up for the grand finale." "Let's just hope it's not our finale," Lyra added grimly as they burst out into the open air, the chill night a welcome contradiction to the furnace of tension they left behind. The trio didn't stop running until the factory was a distant silhouette against the horizon. Only then did they allow themselves a moment to breathe, panting heavily, bodies shivering from more than just the cold. "So what now?" Zephyr asked, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "Now," Helix replied, still catching his breath, "we regroup, figure out a way to shut them down for good. Before they kick off their universe-altering fireworks display. Got any bright ideas?" Lyra asked, though the exhaustion in her voice suggested she wasn't expecting much. Helix shrugged. "Well, I could always throw more gadgets at the problem until something sticks." Zephyr let out a short, humorless laugh. "In other words, we're screwed." "Not yet," Lyra countered. "We've still got cards to play. And if Helix can whip up more surprises, maybe we can beat them at their own game." "Yeah," Helix added, his tone a mix of determination and lunacy. "Besides, I'd hate to let those cultists have all the fun." As they trudged back into the shadows of Solumbria, the tremors in the city seemed to echo their own uncertainty. The odds were stacked against them, as always, but that didn't mean they were beaten. Not yet. Zephyr glanced at his companions, feeling a surge of camaraderie in the face of impending doom. "Let's make sure we're the last one standing when the dust settles." "Agreed," Lyra said, her smile a ghost of its usual ferocity. Helix nodded, his eyes glinting with defiance. "After all, someone's got to tell the tale of how we outsmarted the universe." And so they pressed on, driven by the stubborn hope that they could pull victory from the jaws of cosmic disaster. Because if life had taught them anything, it was that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, there was always a chance to turn the tide. Zephyr Gant and Lyra Tamsin sat back-to-back in a small, dimly lit cell, the dull hum of machinery echoing off the cold, metallic walls. A single bulb flickered overhead, trying its best to illuminate the scene, but ultimately failing like a student on their third attempt at quantum calculus. Their wrists were bound with some kind of high-tech zip ties, as if their captors had sympathy for Earth's extinct stationary industry. "Well," Zephyr said, breaking the silence, "this is cozy. Who knew cults had a budget for such luxury?" "Right," Lyra replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Next they'll offer us complimentary brainwashing sessions. I'm hoping for a spa day." Zephyr chuckled, though it was more to stave off the growing dread than anything else. "You think they have a loyalty program?" "I'd hate to miss out on a free escape attempt after 10 imprisonments." Lyra shifted, the motion as uncomfortable as their current predicament. "You know, I expected our lives to flash before our eyes at some point. I just didn't expect it to be like a poorly edited montage." Before Zephyr could respond, the cell door creaked open, revealing a cultist with a face that could be used as a model for disgruntlement. He shuffled in, carrying a tray with what looked like 2 bowls of something that could optimistically be called food. He set the tray on the floor, eyeing them with a mixture of disdain and mild curiosity. "Thought you might be hungry," he grunted, as if the words physically pained him. "Ah, dinner service. What a treat," Zephyr said. "Does this come with a side of burnt hopes?" The cultist ignored the jab, a testament to his rigorous training in ignoring sarcasm. He left the room as silently as he came, leaving behind the bowls and an awkward silence. Zephyr craned his neck to peer at their meal. "So, what do you think? Rat stew or mystery mush?" Let's go with Mystery Mush, Lyra said, straining to catch a glimpse. At least then we have plausible deniability. While they picked at their food, Zepha's mind churned. We need to figure out a way out of this cell, and fast. There's something off about Voss's plan. Lyra nodded. Yeah, like everything. But what's bothering you specifically? Zepha thought back to the console Voss had been fiddling with. That contraption he was so proud of. It's unstable. The way the reading spiked when Helix threw his little gadget in. It's like building a house of cards on a trampoline. Lyra smirked. So, you're saying his grand plan might just collapse under its own stupidity? Exactly, Zephyr replied. And if we can shove a little more chaos into that mix, we might turn the tables. The problem was getting out of the cell without alerting every robe-wearing nutjob this side of the Milky Way. Zephyr's eyes scanned their dreary prison for anything useful, but his gaze kept falling back on those bowls. It wasn't much, but maybe it didn't have to be. Got an idea, Zephyr said, lowering his voice. But it's a bit of a long shot. Everything we do is, Lyra replied. What have you got? Zephyr leaned closer. We use the bowls to reflect light from that flickering bulb, see if we can trick the sensor on the door into thinking it's time for the midnight snack escape plan. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Sounds about as reliable as a politician's promise, but why not? They shifted together awkwardly, positioning the bowls just right. It took several tries and a bit of cursing, but eventually they managed to angle the meager light towards the cell's electronic lock. There was a faint click like an apathetic applause, and the door slid open just a crack. Well, what do you know? Zephyr murmured. Our own little miracle. Let's not start the victory parade just yet, Lyra muttered. They slipped through the door, every step a calculated risk as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Their aim, find Helix, assuming he wasn't already a cultist's idea of a charming centerpiece. As they moved, Zephyr noticed something strange. Cultists were arguing, actual voices raised in heated debate. He and Lyra pressed themselves against the wall, listening. It's madness, one cultist declared. Voss's plan could unravel everything. We shouldn't be blindly following. We need to think. But we're so close, another voice argued, shaky with conviction but clearly on the defensive. This is our chance to reshape the universe. Zephyr turned to Lyra, eyes gleaming with opportunity. Sounds like Voss is losing his grip. An opening, Lyra said, nodding. If we can exploit it, maybe we can turn some of them. They continued, the infighting amongst cultists providing an unexpected cover. Eventually they found themselves in a room that seemed to serve as a makeshift archive. Shelves lined the walls, filled with tablets and data slates, a wealth of knowledge that might hold the key to Earth's disappearance. Jackpot, Lyra whispered, grabbing a tablet and skimming its contents. Zephyr kept watch, finally spotting the familiar disheveled silhouette of Helix approaching from another corridor. Just the genius we needed. Helix grinned, though it came off as more of a stressed grimace. I heard the cell doors buzzing open. Thought you might be causing trouble. Wouldn't be us if we weren't, Lyra said, waving the tablet. Found something juicy. Voss's grand scheme has more holes than a conspiracy theorist's manifesto. Helix took a quick look. Damn, the guy's overreaching. If we spread this, maybe we can sway some of the cultists. Exactly, Zephyr replied. Divide and conquer, classic strategy. But just as they began discussing their plan, a group of cultists stormed into the room. There was a tense pause, the kind that usually preceded a lot of shouting and possibly a laser bolt or two. What are you doing here? One demanded, his tone more curious than hostile. What every good prisoner does, Zephyr shot back, snooping where we're not wanted. The cultists hesitated, clearly unsure of their own priorities. Seizing the moment, Lyra stepped forward, brandishing the tablet like an accusation. Voss is leading you to disaster. Look at this, he's playing with forces that could obliterate us all. The cultists exchanged glances, frowns deepening. Waver the cultist, we'll call him, stepped forward. Is it true? Could Voss's plan fail? Not just fail, Helix interjected. Backfire spectacularly. We're talking universe-ending fiasco territory. Waver's eyes flickered with something that looked suspiciously like doubt. What do you suggest? Zephyr seized the momentum. Join us. Help us stop this madness before it's too late. It hung in the air, the proposal, like a dare no one wanted to take. But slowly expressions shifted, the undercurrent of dissent bubbling to the surface. They needed assurance, a leader, maybe just a nudge to see reason beyond fanaticism. We've been kept in the dark, Waver admitted, his voice cracking. I'm tired of it. With that confession, the dam broke. Other cultists stepped forward, offering their allegiance in hushed but fervent tones. It wasn't a full-scale revolution, but it was a start. All right, Waver said. What's the plan? Zephyr exchanged a look with Lyra and Helix, the trio united by a shared, reckless determination. We get access to that console and shut down the gateway. With your help, we can take control of the factory. The cultists nodded, determination igniting their once blank stares. It was a gamble, trusting them, but with Silumbria's fate hanging in the balance, they needed allies, even if they wore ridiculous robes. Together, as a ragtag alliance of the disillusioned, they made their way through the corridors, past guards and traps, every step pushing them closer to defying destiny itself. The stakes hadn't changed, only their odds, and they were still dictated by a cosmic uncertainty that held no regard for their plans. As they approached the chamber holding the gateway, Zephyr couldn't help but smirk at his companions. Let's show them why messing with humans is a bad idea. Right, Helix replied, brandishing a handful of gadgets like a sci-fi Santa Claus. Time to remind them of our tenacity. Lyra grinned, feeling more alive than she had in ages. And our penchant for chaos. They burst into the chamber, the sight of Voss and his loyalists staring at them with expressions ranging from shock to rage. It was time to tip the scales. Ah, back for the encore, Voss sneered, though the confidence in his voice wavered as more cultists entered, joining the rebellious side. Just couldn't resist, Zephyr replied. We brought friends this time, hope it doesn't ruin your party. The tension in the room was palpable, a combustible mix of fear, doubt, and defiance. With the gateway looming behind Voss, spinning and pulsating with potential catastrophe, the stage was set. Helix stepped forward, raising one of his concocted devices. Let's see how you handle a little improvisation. With that, the device activated, unleashing a pulse that sent the gateway into a frenzy. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and chaos erupted as the fragile equilibrium Voss relied on buckled under the pressure. In the ensuing pandemonium, Zephyr, Lyra, and their newfound allies pushed towards the console. It was time to put their plan into action, to turn Voss's arrogance into his downfall. Don't let them, Voss shouted, his desperation cutting through the chaos. But it was too late. Zephyr reached the console, fingers flying over controls as Helix provided guidance, the two of them working in tandem to override the system. Waver and the others held back Voss's loyalists, a hastily formed line of defense that gave them the precious seconds they needed. Almost there, Helix called out, his voice rising above the din. Zephyr felt the console respond under his touch, a stubborn machine finally yielding. Got it. Initiating shutdown. The gateway's fluctuations slowed, its energy dissipating like a storm losing its fury. The light steadied, the alarm ceased, and the room fell into a stunned silence. Voss stared at the now dormant gateway, disbelief etched across his features. You fools, you've doomed us all. No, Zephyr said, facing him with grim satisfaction. We just saved us. Voss's followers, those who hadn't turned, looked lost, their faith shattered alongside their leader's ambitions. It was over for now, but Zephyr knew victory was just the first step. The real challenge lay ahead, repairing the damage done and ensuring a future where humanity dictated its own fate, not some deluded cult. As the dust settled and the adrenaline ebbed, Zephyr turned to his companions. Guess we've got a new chapter to write. Lyra nodded, a fierce, undying spark in her eyes. Let's make it a good one, Helix chuckled, his relief palpable. And maybe this time we can avoid the impending doom. Waver, now an unexpected ally, stepped forward, hesitant but hopeful. So what's next? Zephyr smiled, a weary but genuine expression. We rebuild, we find Earth. And we make sure this universe knows we're not to be underestimated. Together, they walked out of the chamber, leaving behind the echoes of a failed prophecy and stepping into a future they were determined to shape by their terms. The universe was still a dangerous, unpredictable place, but it was theirs as long as they had the will to fight for it. And fight they would. Zephyr Gant stood in the gloomy corridor of the cult's central temple, wondering if fate had a sick sense of humor, or if it was just his luck that he'd end up leading a ragtag squad of disgruntled cultists and sarcastic rebels. The temple loomed ahead, all Gothic spires and ominous shadows, like the set of a cheap horror flick, but with the stakes cranked up to cosmic disaster levels. "Here we are, folks," Zephyr announced, his voice echoing off the cold metal walls. "The belly of the beast. Step right up, see the wonders of fanaticism run amok." Lyra snorted beside him, her expression a mix of sarcasm and determination. "I was expecting more. Maybe a welcome to oblivion sign or at least complimentary doomsday cookies." Helix, ever the cybernetic archaeologist, was fiddling with a device that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and wishful thinking. "Give me a minute. This should scramble their sensors good and proper. Take your time," Zephyr drawled, casting a glance at the restless cultists who'd decided treason was a better bet than cosmic annihilation. "They're not going anywhere, except maybe therapy after this." Waver, now sporting the unofficial badge of traitor in charge, nodded in agreement. The ex-cultist couldn't quite shake the haunted look of someone who'd just realized their entire belief system had more holes than Swiss cheese. "We need to move before they kick off the ritual." Voss's cronies might not be the sharpest knives, but desperation makes people do stupid things. Zephyr raised an eyebrow. "Stupider than following a madman trying to rewrite reality. That's a high bar." The plan was simple. Simple in the way a rocket launch was simple. Find the ritual chamber, disrupt it with a mix of human ingenuity and chaotic improvisation, and maybe, just maybe, restore Earth's coordinates on the star maps. Easy peasy. "Helix, how's that doohickey coming?" Zephyr asked, trying to sound nonchalant while the pit of his stomach felt like it was auditioning for an extreme sports video. "Almost there," Helix replied, twisting wires and muttering in a language that was half technical jargon, half curse words. "This should give Voss's ritual a nice little migraine." Lyra leaned closer to Zephyr, her voice low. "Do you really think we can pull this off? We're talking about the universe here. Not exactly a backyard science project." Zephyr shrugged, a lopsided grin on his face. "If humanity's good at one thing, it's pulling off the impossible with duct tape and sheer stubbornness." Helix finally straightened, holding up his creation like a trophy. "Done. Let's go crash a cult party." The group moved out, a motley collection of rebels and defectors, their footsteps echoing ominously in the silent corridors. Zephyr kept his mind focused on the task at hand, pushing down the doubts that clawed at the edges of his thoughts. Failure wasn't an option, not with Earth's fate hanging in the balance. As they approached the ritual chamber, the air grew heavy with anticipation, and the faint, unsettling hum of the black hole technology that powered Solumbria's grand delusions. The door loomed ahead, guarded by a couple of cultists who looked as thrilled as anyone working mandatory overtime on a weekend. Zephyr motioned for silence, then crept forward with Lyra and Waver at his side. A quick, silent takedown later, the guards were out cold, and the door stood unguarded, like a great maw inviting them into the unknown. "Showtime," Zephyr whispered, pushing the door open. The chamber beyond was a cathedral of madness. Cultists in their ridiculous robes chanted in unison, their voices merging into a dissonant symphony of fanaticism. At the center, Archon Voss stood before a massive console, eyes wide with the kind of fervor usually reserved for end-of-the-world sales. Voss turned as they entered, his expression a mixture of disdain and triumph. "Ah, the prodigal rebels return. Here to witness the dawn of a new era, more like here to stop you before you turn the universe into your personal dumpster fire." Zephyr shot back, stepping forward with his ragtag crew. Voss sneered, gesturing to the cultists around him. You think this handful of turncoats can stop what's already been set in motion? Not just this handful, Lyra said, waving a hand at the growing number of defectors filtering into the room. Looks like not everyone's buying your cosmic snake oil. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Voss's face, but he quickly masked it with bravado. No matter. The ritual has reached the point of no return. You're too late. Helix stepped forward, holding his device like a grenade. Funny thing about points of no return, they're usually poorly marked. With a flick of his wrist, Helix activated the device. A pulse of energy rippled through the chamber, causing the console to sputter and spark like a malfunctioning carnival ride. The cultists faltered, their chanting dissolving into confusion. Now, Zephyr yelled and chaos erupted. The rebels surged forward, scattering the cultists like startled pigeons. Helix and Zephyr made a beeline for the console, while Lyra and Waver coordinated the defense, turning the cultists' own confusion against them. Voss, for all his bluster, was no coward. He lunged for Zephyr, a knife glinting in his hand. You meddling! Zephyr sidestepped the attack, grabbing Voss's wrist and twisting it with a satisfying crunch. Sorry, Voss, but humanity doesn't need a babysitter. The knife clattered to the floor and Voss staggered back, clutching his wrist. You fools have no idea what you're doing. Probably true, Zephyr conceded, but we prefer not knowing to your version of certainty. Helix was already at the console, fingers flying over the controls, fighting the machine with the kind of intensity usually reserved for last-minute exam cramming. Almost got it. The room was a cacophony of shouts, curses, and the hum of unstable machinery. Zephyr kept an eye on the fight, trusting in Lyra's ability to keep the cultists off their backs. Finally, Helix let out a triumphant shout. Done. Coordinates restored. Zephyr felt a surge of relief, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. Earth's back on the map, Helix nodded, grinning like a madman. And the gateways shut for good. Voss, crumpled on the floor, looked up at them with a mix of rage and disbelief. You've doomed us all. The universe will never forgive this. Zephyr crouched beside him, meeting his gaze with a grim smile. The universe? Maybe. But we don't owe it an apology. As the last of the cultists were subdued, Zephyr joined his companions, the weight of what they'd done settling in. They'd stopped a madman, perhaps even saved the universe from a fate worse than bad reception during a live stream. Lyra came up beside him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. We did it. Yeah, Zephyr agreed, though his voice was softer, more thoughtful. Now we just have to figure out what comes next. Waver approached, looking more at peace than he had since this whole mess began. Thank you for giving us a choice. Zephyr shrugged, offering a wry smile. Just doing what any self-respecting human would do when faced with the end of the world. Helix, still fiddling with his gadgets, nodded, and proving once again that we're the best at saving our own skin. Together, they stepped away from the chaos, leaving behind the broken pieces of a failed prophecy. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it was a road they could choose, a future they could shape. And that, Zephyr thought, might just be worth every bit of madness they'd endured. Let's get out of here, he said, leading the way. I hear Solumbria's got a decent bar scene still standing. Lyra grinned, following without hesitation. First round's on you, hero deal, Zephyr agreed, feeling the weight of their victory settling into something more manageable. And let's make sure our next adventure isn't quite so cosmic. As they left the temple, the universe seemed a little brighter, a little more hopeful. Maybe it was the adrenaline talking, or maybe it was the knowledge that they dared to defy fate and won. In the end, that was enough. For now. And as they disappeared into the shadowy streets of Solumbria, the distant hum of the city a comforting backdrop, Zephyr couldn't help but smile. Because the universe was a vast, unpredictable place, but it was theirs. And that was a truth worth fighting for. The lunar city of Solumbria was starting to look surprisingly normal, which, considering recent events, was a bit like calling a collapsing star a bit dense. The once insufferable hum of the machine worship cult's black hole technology had faded into a gentle, eerie silence, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of their madness. Zephyr Gant, self-proclaimed leader of a ragtag squad of sarcastic rebels, stood in the shadow of Silumbria's infamous observatory, a place that had seen more unhinged plots to rewrite reality than a bad sci-fi convention. He glanced around, taking in the aftermath with a mix of relief and the kind of disbelief usually reserved for celebrity comebacks. Feels weird, doesn't it? Lyra Tamsin, his fellow rebel and partner in sarcasm, joined him, surveying the scene with a wry smile. Like we're in the eye of a hurricane, but the hurricane's run out of steam. Yeah, Zephyr agreed, watching as the city slowly came back to life. People emerged from hiding like timid meerkats, peering into the sunlight with caution. I half expected the end to come with more fireworks. Lyra chuckled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Seems the universe decided to spare us the grand finale, probably saving it for the sequel. Zephyr snorted. Right. Because what we really need is a sequel to this cosmic dumpster fire. Helix, ever the cybernetic archaeologist with a penchant for tinkering and a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush, approached them. He was still fiddling with his cobbled-together sensor-scrambling device, now more of a trophy than a tool. Looks like we pulled it off, huh? He said, sounding both proud and a little bemused. We stopped Voss from playing God, if that's what you mean, Zephyr replied. Though pulled it off might be overstating things. More like stumbled awkwardly across the finish line. Helix grinned, unperturbed. Hey, as long as we're still standing, I call it a win. Waver joined them, looking more at ease than he had since defecting from the cult. He'd swapped the haunted look for something closer to hope, like a man who'd found a map in the maze. The city's stabilizing. Without the cult's influence, people are starting to think for themselves again. Dangerous habit that, Zephyr noted, a smirk playing at his lips. Thinking, Waver chuckled softly, a sound that was both foreign and welcome. Thanks to you lot, they've got the chance. Zephyr shrugged, feigning nonchalance. All in a day's work. Can't have a cult running the place now, can we? Bad for business. Speaking of business, Lyra interjected, what do we do now? We've got a city that barely trusts itself, let alone us. Zephyr scratched his chin thoughtfully. Maybe we give them something else to focus on, like rebuilding, or better yet, a nice, mundane scandal. Something with intrigue but no cosmic implications. Lyra nodded. Like a mayoral election. Those are usually good for a bit of chaos. Helix chimed in, I could rig a few machines, make it interesting. Helix, Zephyr said, pointing a finger at him, I like the way you think. But let's keep the rigging to a minimum. We've had enough of tinkering with reality for one lifetime. As they talked, the city's denizens began to gather in small groups, exchanging stories and cautiously optimistic gestures. The cult's fall had left a power vacuum, one that threatened to suck in anyone foolish enough to stand too close. But Zephyr and his crew had no intention of filling it. They'd seen enough tyranny dressed as leadership to last a lifetime. Waver, Zephyr said, turning to the ex-cultist, you've got connections. You think we can get people to work together without trying to invent a new religion? Waver considered this, his expression thoughtful. I reckon we could. If we show them it's possible, great, Zephyr replied, clapping him on the shoulder. Then let's get to it. Spread the word. We're not here to lead, just to lend a hand. Waver nodded, a glint of determination in his eyes. We'll make it work. As Waver moved off to rally the citizens, Lyra leaned in closer to Zephyr. You think we've really got a chance? Starting over, I mean. Zephyr met her gaze, his trademark grin making an appearance despite the gravity of the question. If there's one thing humans are good at, it's making a mess and then figuring out how to clean it up. We've got a knack for it. Lyra laughed softly. You really are an optimist, you know that. Don't spread that around, Zephyr warned playfully. I've got a reputation to maintain. The two of them stood there for a moment, watching as Silumbria began its tentative steps toward recovery. The cult's departure had left scars, but it had also opened doors, ones that led to cooperation instead of conflict, understanding instead of indoctrination. Helix interrupted their reverie, holding up the sensor scrambler with a sheepish grin. So, what do we do with this? Museum piece? Or should I keep it for old time's sake? Zephyr considered it. Let's keep it around. Never know when we might need to give the universe another headache. Lyra nodded approvingly. Plus, it'll make a great conversation starter at parties. With that, the trio moved into the city, ready to play their part in reshaping Solumbria's future. Their steps echoed through the streets, accompanied by the hopeful murmurs of a population on the brink of something new. As they walked, Zephyr couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of humanity. No matter how many times they were knocked down, they always found a way to get back up, dust themselves off, and try again. It was a testament to their stubbornness, their ingenuity, and their refusal to surrender to fate. "Hey," Lyra called, breaking Zephyr's contemplative silence. "You hungry?" "I hear there's a place still open, serving up something resembling food." "Lead the way," Zephyr replied, feeling his stomach rumble in agreement. "I could eat a black hole." The three of them set off, their laughter echoing in the alleyways of Solumbria. It was a sound that was both foreign and familiar, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was room for joy, for hope, and for the simple pleasure of being alive. Their journey was far from over, but for now they had each other, a city that needed them and a future ripe with possibility. And as they disappeared into the bustling streets, Zephyr couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, they had already won. The universe was still vast, unpredictable, and full of danger, but it was also theirs to explore. And that, Zephyr thought, was the best kind of adventure.